Welcome to the South Central District public meeting tonight. I'm Brad Eifert. I'm the South Central District Manager. We also have our two biologists that work out of this office, Tyler Bennett and Thomas Wallace, on here. So you might be hearing a little bit out of them too before the night's over. But anyway, I'm going to jump right into things and get going with things since we're a little bit behind schedule already. I'd like to first of all welcome y'all here. We do have one commissioner on. Commissioner Stephen Mossman from Lincoln is on, so I welcome him to the meeting. And with that, we'll jump into this and talk about tonight's agenda. All right. Tonight we're gonna, for the South Central, I'm gonna give you just a brief overview of the South Central District and who we are and the resources that we manage out here in the South Central part of the state. And we'll spend a pretty considerable time talking about some of our project updates. We got a lot of things going on out here with habitat improvements and access improvements. And then we'll jump into the meat of the fisheries management and what we have going on with management and research. Talk about some reservoir information because I know that impacts most of you when you go boating out there. And then we'll finish off with some aquatic invasive species information. Here's a map of the district boundaries of the fisheries division. And we did a small change this year. We added the North Central District to the mix up there and with the main office in Valentine. And it didn't really have any impact on the South Central District. We're still 20 counties strong down here in the south part of the state. We're probably, in terms of population, we're second in size just to the southeast. We have the Tri-Cities, Gothenburg, Lexington as our big communities. And so we have a pretty high population base, but we're also fortunate that we have a lot of recreational resources down here. All in all, we manage about 123 water bodies in our district. They range in size from a half acre up to Harlan County Reservoir, which is 13,500 acres when full. So all in all, we're working on about 23,000 acres of water. 9 of those are irrigation reservoirs, and they comprise about 22,000 acres of the water that we manage. The remaining 111 bodies of water or so that we have are only take up about 1,000 acres. So we're spread out pretty much everywhere. There's water to fish pretty much everywhere in every corner of the district. And like I said, we have those 9 irrigation reservoirs. We have a whole variety of interstate lakes along the I-80 corridor. We got 35 community waters, so there's opportunities in nearly every town of any decent size in the whole district for people to get out and wet a line. Our other lakes on the list would be NRD lakes, some state recreation lakes that we have, and some other county-owned water bodies. We have kind of a unique resource out in western Dawson County with the Central Nebraska Public Power Irrigation Supply Canal. We've got about 40 miles of a large permanent canal out there that has water year-round that provides some really unique fishing opportunities for a whole variety of species of fish. And then, of course, we have the Platte, the Loop, and Republican River basins in our district that we do some work on also. Just to highlight our irrigation reservoirs, these are by far and away the most important resources we have in terms of drawing anglers from across the Midwest to come fish in Nebraska. Up in the upper northern part of our district is Davis Creek and Sherman. They're both constructed for irrigation purposes. Sherman's owned by the Farwell Irrigation District, and Davis Creek is owned by the Bureau of Rec. And out in our western corner of our district would be the lakes that are owned by Central Nebraska Public Power and Irrigation District. And there's about 7 of those out there that we manage. And they were built for both power and irrigation. And then Harlan in the bottom, down in the lower part of our district, was constructed for flood control and also irrigation. Moving on to our interstate lakes, there's about 55 or 53 of these, I think, along the interstate from Grand Island to Gothenburg. You know, they're really unique resources in that they have clear groundwater and we manage them for a whole variety of different species of fish. So you can catch anything from largemouth bass to smallmouth bass to tiger muskies or muskies and walleyes, and they just provide a really neat opportunity for people who don't have boats that can't get on our big reservoirs, and they can bank fish them or kayak fish them, and so they're a good resource to have. Here's the motley crew that we have that manages our water bodies. There's four of us here in Kearney that are fisheries based, myself, and then the two management biologists would be Tyler Bennett and Thomas Wallace. They're both relatively new to the agency. Tyler's been here about a year, and Thomas has been here about a month. So, they're fresh out of college and full of good ideas, and they're the future of our fisheries management in this state. And we also have Alex Engel in our office. He's a research reservoir biologist, does a lot of work with University of Nebraska at Kearney, working with graduate students and doing research on reservoirs throughout the whole western part of the state. So, and then we get a temporary or two, and we work pretty close with UNK, and we get some of their students, and we like to mentor them and keep them involved with what's going on in the fisheries world. And they provide some pretty good free labor for us at times. So moving right into some project updates here. I'm going to talk about aquatic habitat projects and angler access and boating projects. And, to me, these are fun projects to work on. We're real fortunate in Nebraska that we have some dedicated funding to do these kind of habitat projects. And last night, Jeff Jackson gave a really good talk on how the Aquatic Habitat Program works. And so I encourage you, if you missed that, go back and check it out on YouTube and see that. But these kind of projects are really visible, and they make a really big impact to our anglers in our state. So we're going to talk about those next. And kind of the premier one we have going on this year is over at Windmill State Recreation Area. And if you're not familiar with Windmill, it's a state rec area over at the Gibbon interchange. It has six sandpit lakes on it that total about 25 acres, and great spot for camping. And the park superintendent over there, Grant Gardner, does just a fantastic job of keeping that place in top condition. And so Game and Parks, we realize the importance of these areas for families and for youth to go fishing, and for people who, don't have the ability to get out on big water. We like to provide them angling opportunities also. So we undertook this project this year. It's been in the planning process for several, but it started in the fall of 2025, and it's going to finish here pretty quick. But we're doing a variety of things, and including some deepening of some of the water bodies, some flood prevention, and a big part of it's going to be angler access. So I'll show you here some of the pictures of it here. Here's an example of some of the flood control prevention we're doing on Lake One, which is the biggest water body on this property. It's about 8 acres, and it has an active channel that kind of flows in it when we see some high water conditions over there. And with that, unfortunately, come a lot of carp and gar and other rough fish that we really didn't want in this lake. And so with this new bypass channel that you see here on the right, we're hoping that we can, keep those rough fish out, and maybe in the future we can get in there and renovate this lake and create a better fishery in it. Also over there, we're looking at doing some selective deepening on several of the lakes. This happens to be lake number 4. And on the left, you can see where in low water, there's a portion of the lake that gets disconnected during the summer, and that causes some issues with stranding fish back there and having some fish kills. And so we removed several hundred cubic yards of material out of here and increased that size of Lake 4 by about a half an acre or so. And we're doing that same thing on Lake 6 also. So anglers will notice a little bit of improvement in the size of some of the lakes when they go out there. And then, as I mentioned, angler access is also a huge part of this project. We've gone in and reshaped a lot of bank lines, went in and created some wooden fishing piers, created some rock bump outs, which use a lot of rock for the base, which, creates good fish habitat as well as a nice base for people to fish off of. We're incorporating some kayak landing areas in here for people to easily get their boat in, their kayaks in. And then we also have a nice floating dock that's going to go in that I don't have a picture of. But so expect this project to be done here in, probably first part of May or so. And it's going to be a real nice project. So if you've never been there, I'd encourage you to get over there and take your kids and get out and enjoy it. We also received a nice environmental trust fund grant this last year to work on Interstate 80 lakes. And we were able to go in and do a lot of selective clearing of invasive Russian olive trees and cedar trees on a lot of these areas to open up the shoreline again and, provide anglers some better access along the shore, and also just to open these areas up and make them more visible. They were getting pretty overgrown, and with that becomes a lot of we once in a while we'll get people trying to live on these areas and do other kinds of activities besides fishing and hunting, and we like to kind of keep those people out of there. So by opening them up a little bit, it kind of helps out and makes them just more visible and more attractive to anglers. So we did that on about 9 or 10 lakes here around Kearney, and we were also able to purchase a nice new habitat barge, which is I think it's a 28-foot boat, and has a nice hydraulic bed on it that you can dump stuff off of. And so we took quite a few of the trees on several of these lakes and put them back in as fish habitat. And so we kind of provided some nice fish attractors and that for anglers. That project's all complete now. And then finally, I won't touch on it a lot this year because we did talk about it last year with Methodist Cove pretty in depth, but we finished up that 1135 project down there that we did in partnership with the Corps of Engineers. And it was, one of the largest aquatic habitat projects we've ever completed in our state. And it was about a $12 million job and project. And the Corps provided most of the funding for it. And we're real happy with the way it turned out. Unfortunately, reservoir levels are down kind of low down there, and we're not seeing the full benefits of it yet, but we definitely will here in the future. But, just to summarize what we did down there is we took out over 150,000 yards of sediment. And most of that was out of Methodist Cove, but we also took out a good chunk in the sediment basin above Methodist, which allowed some better fish habitat up there. And we went in and restocked that sediment basin with, some bass and bluegill, crappie, and those type of things for kids to get in there and fish. We added almost a half mile of rock riprap by creating, breakwaters and jetties and shoreline protection, which provides really good fish habitat as well as angler access. And then we put a lot of extra artificial trees and structures in the reservoir to provide deep water habitat for fish. So turned out to be a really good project. And once the reservoir starts to fill back up again, it'll really be a benefit for fish and anglers, I believe. Moving on to boating access a little bit. We finished up a new boat ramp at Midway and Gallagher back in March. This project included 2 brand new concrete ramps, 2 new docks, improved parking and lighting. And so they're both opened up now and ready to go. I will say that the Gallagher ramp right now is unusable because of low water levels in that reservoir. Central has their water levels at winter elevation and won't be bringing them up until the end of March. So I'd probably steer clear of that ramp until about the 1st of April when they bring water levels up. So Phillips Canyon is a project I've been talking about for about 5 years on this talk, and this is going to be the last year I talk about it because it's hopefully going to be opened up and ready to go here in the next month or so. But it's a project we've been working on with Central over the past several years, and we the old site, which is actually the current site now because the new one's not open yet, but it's just a dirt road to get in there, and it's a gravel ramp, and access is terrible during most of the time. So we found a new location and did a project with Central, and And it's been kind of a long, drawn out process, but we're coming to a close now, and we're expecting it to get opened up here as soon as we can get some details ironed out on maintenance and lease agreements with Central. So our Parks Division and Central will be working together here this in the next week or two, trying to iron out some agreements, and then we'll get her open for you guys to use. But here's some aerial photos of the new project. Back here in the background, up on the upper part of that, is Highway 283 that runs from Lexington down to Johnson Lake. And so we're coming off that in a new spot. It's about a half-mile gravel road coming in now. And we have a nice new ramp, dock, and lighting, and a pit toilet there for people to use. So it should be a pretty good project here once it gets opened up at the end of the month. Then the final boating project that took place out in that country happened at Johnson Reservoir, and this was one that was completely funded by Central Nebraska Public Power. Last year, they went in and built some breakwaters out in front of Meadows, and they've since installed some courtesy docks back there so people can park back there and visit the restaurant up there. And then they put in a new boat ramp over there this fall and opened that up. So those are all courtesy of Central Nebraska Public Power. So, and then the final boating access project in that area is we had an old stationary boat dock at Plum Creek, which wasn't real functional during low water. So we did tear that out last year, put a new floating dock in. And while it was a nice improvement, we've still had a few issues with it being a little too far from the ramp last year. So we're going to try to do some modifications and get it moved over closer to the boat ramp this year to make things a little easier for people to use it. So we do have a couple new projects and new amenity projects coming on. We got a new fish cleaning station scheduled for Sherman, Thunder Bay area. It should hopefully be installed sometime this spring. And then we got a new courtesy docks going in at the Johnson Inlet and also over at Mormon Island. Moving on into fisheries management and research stuff. Fisheries management is one of the big, I mean, that's kind of what our titles are, and that's the big thing, big job duty that we do. And fish population surveys are one of the things we do. We spend a lot of our time on in the spring and fall. Last year, we surveyed about 25 different lakes and reservoirs. And I'm not going to go into the details of all the sampling results, what we caught out of those, because we do summarize all that and publish it in some survey summaries for all of our major reservoirs. So if you want to know the past history of what we've caught at Harlan over the past 10 years, you can go online and there's a document that'll describe all that. And if you're just curious on which lakes are the best for walleye fishing, you can check out the fishing forecast that we put out each fall. And but these fish population surveys, they allow us to evaluate fish stocking and regulations and just allow us to monitor fish populations over time, which provide us a lot of data to make educated decisions on how we manage things in the future. So I encourage you to go to our website and take advantage of these documents. And if you have any questions about anything in them, just reach out to us biologists, and we'd be more than glad to try to explain what we have written down in them. The other big thing we do is we stock a lot of fish in our district, and we have an amazing hatchery staff that will do about anything or they'll at least try to do anything you can ask them to do, and generally they're pretty successful at it. But in South Central, we're going to stock 16 species of fish this year. Totals over 15 million, most of which are all walleye fry. But we do stock fish from the size of fry all the way up to 12-inch, trout, muskellunge, and that type of thing. So all our fish stockings are online. So if you have any questions on what lake's getting stocked, you can look all that up on our website also. And speaking of stocking, we got spring trout stockings coming up here starting this week. And I think our Grand Island, Hastings Lakes are going to get stocked here and later on this week, and then the rest will get stocked next week. But Our hatcheries are raising some 12-inch fish this year, so you should see a pretty nice product going in all these. And so I encourage you to get out, take your kids with you, and get after these trout while the water temperatures are still cool. And the other thing we have going on is we have a trout survey we've been doing for about a year now, trying to get some input from trout anglers. And so if you haven't already filled this out, I encourage you to fill it out, go online to that website, and answer the questions, and we'll use your input. We're doing a statewide trout management plan that we're trying to get developed, and so we'll gladly use your input on that to make our decisions. Blue catfish, they're another species that we have been stocking in recent years over in the Elwood area, and then also in Plum Creek, Gallagher, and Midway. And we haven't spent a lot of time sampling them over the years, but we did spend a couple days on the water at Elwood last year doing some electrofishing for them, and we didn't see a lot of fish, but we did see a fair number. And what we found interesting is that we only really found one year class of them, though, and that was from 2017. And those fish were all about 20 to 26 inches long, so they didn't grow as fast as what I thought, but they were nice fish. And but we stock these out of our hatcheries at various sizes. They're kind of a hard fish to grow. It takes 2 seasons in the hatchery to get them up to 8 or 9 inches where we want to stock them. And so to try to speed the process up, our hatcheries now are raising some of them indoors in the RAS systems, which you see in that picture there above that fish. And so they can get them up to 12 inches pretty quick, and they're feeding them year round. And so to evaluate that, we marked a bunch of them last fall, and by cutting their adipose fin off, which leaves a permanent mark. When they get big, they won't have that fin back there anymore. And we can go back in and see where they came from and see what stocking they came from. And we're doing that kind of same type of evaluation on walleyes. Walleyes are the fish that we stock more than anything else, and it's pretty costly. We have a lot of money tied up in the collection and production of these fish, and it takes a lot of work to go from egg to an adult. So we'd like to evaluate them and make sure what we're stocking is actually worth the money that we're spending on it. And so we can do this by marking those fish when they're fry or fingerlings in an OTC bath, which is oxytetracycline. And then we can go back and sacrifice that fish at a later date, look at its odorless, and then see if we see that mark, and that'll tell us if it came from a hatchery or not. So we've been doing this at Davis Creek and comparing fried versus fingerling stockings, and because we stock both there every year, and it kind of shows us we're seeing fry more often than we're seeing fingerlings. I mean, they're contributing more to the annual year class. Sherman's kind of a different situation. We've got pretty good natural recruitment there in most years. And so last year we took a look at fingerling stockings versus what we see for natural. And, it's almost 50-50 there. I mean, we get a lot of natural recruited fish and which is a good thing. And then Harlan last year, we tried an experimental stocking of 1-inch fingerlings in early May. The idea behind that was to try to get some little walleye in there that prior to the gizzard shad spawn, so they could start feeding on them larval gizzard shad. And so we compared that with the fry that we also stocked last year also. And we found last year that the fry did quite a bit better than the fingerlings, about 2-to-1, or 3-to-1. But we're going to try it again this year and see how it goes. And I mean, those fingerlings did contribute some to the population, but just not as much as what the fry or the natural fish did. So moving on into creel surveys, if you've worked or fished at Harlan or Sherman the last 2 years, you've probably been creeled by us. I'm not going to go into a lot of details, but we're going to do this same creel this coming year at Davis Creek and also at Calamus, but we won't be at Harlan or Sherman this year. And just like our standard survey information, we have a lot of this information on our website. And so you can feel free to go on our website. And I have a couple of reports on there, both Harlan and Sherman creel summaries. But The bottom line is anglers make a lot of trips to these lakes. We had almost 30,000 trips to Harlan last year in a 7-month time frame, coming from all over the state of Nebraska and other states. We had about half that to Sherman last year. We had about 15,000 trips. So these reservoirs are extremely important recreational resources. And, when people go there, they catch a lot of fish. I mean, 58,000 crappie from Sherman Reservoir is a pretty impressive number, if you ask me. So, anyway, feel free to check out those fish sampling reports there. And if you get encountered by our Creel clerk this year at Davis Creek, make sure you answer her questions honestly. Fish regulations, we had very few statewide last year, and the only thing in our district was we added a 21-inch minimum length limit at Wallback City Pond, which is a little pond up north of St. Paul in Greeley County. So not many changes there. We did quite a bit of lake mapping last year. Our two biologists, Tyler and Colton, spent a lot of time playing around with this new biobase system, which is an online system where you can buy a membership, and then we just used our Lowrance graphs that we already owned, and we mapped a bunch of interstate lakes that hadn't been mapped before. And as soon as we get this online, we'll share it with you anglers. We use it to try to determine how much chemical we need to put in a lake to treat vegetation, or how much. If we're going to do an angler access boat ramp project, it's good to have that bathymetric data. But I know you anglers find it useful, so we're working on getting a bunch of that online here in the next month or two. So look for that. Research, like I mentioned, we have a research biologist in our office. We work real close with the University of Nebraska at Kearney, working with grad students. And right now, our research is pretty much concentrated at Harlan, doing some long-term water quality and cove work. And we're also going to include Sherman and Elwood this year into one of the grad students' statewide bass study to get some population dynamic information on our largemouth bass and a couple of our large reservoirs. So it's a good relationship we have with UNK, and we train a lot of future fisheries biologists through the University of Nebraska at Kearney, which is pretty impressive. All right, I'm going to jump into reservoir levels real quick. Most of you know Sherman and Davis Creek, we're lucky they fill up every year. Sherman, I got their word from Farwell, they're going to start filling it a little earlier this year, probably around April 1st. Davis Creek, they'll start filling it probably about the middle of April like they normally do. The Johnson-Elwood system, like I say, is pretty stable. Elwood's down a little over 20 feet now, but they're going to start bringing water into that reservoir here about the 1st of April. And they're not going to fill it all the way to the top, but they're going to bring it up to about 6 foot below full pool hopefully by about the first part of June, it'll be full. And then Harlan, it's a whole different game down there. We've got declining water reservoir levels, and it's pretty concerning at the moment. The red line there is the full pool at 1945.7. We're currently sitting about 9 feet below that at about 1936. And as you can see, since 2021, we've been on kind of a steady decline. And 2025 was no exception. Our inflows were low down there last year. According to the Bureau of Reclamation, inflows were 57% lower than what they normally are in the average 10-year period. So that's not a good sign. And, we're totally dependent on precipitation in the Republican River. So we're hoping we can get some wetter years to help bring things back up. But, if you look back over the last 25 years, we've been at full pool about 10 of those years, and we've been below them the other 15. So, we've seen the highs and lows at Harlan over the years, and I'm sure we'll be back to full eventually, but I can't tell you when at this point in time. For boat ramps down there, right now, the only 2 ramps that are currently open are Patterson Harbor, and then Gremlin just opened back up this week. It had been closed since last August, but we've got just enough water come in the reservoir this winter and spring that Corps was able to open that back up. I would recommend that you use caution when you leave that boat ramp because the channel that goes out into the lake is only about 2 to 2.5 foot deep, and the Corps has it marked really well with buoys, but just make sure you stay on those buoys so you don't get off it too far and get stuck in the mud. The cove itself has plenty of depth by the ramp. It's just kind of that from where the breakwaters stick out into the water, out into the reservoir, where you have to really be careful. The rest of the ramps on the reservoir are currently closed. Cedar Point was open for a while last year, the low water ramp, but it is now closed because the reservoir has come up and flooded it back out. And it's going to be about another 1.5 to 2 feet before Methodist will open up back up here in the upper end. So, but there is good news on the horizon. The Corps has secured a new dredge. It took an act of Congress, literally, and Senator Fisher secured some money for the Corps down there to purchase it. And it's scheduled to be delivered here in April. And with a couple days of getting it together and training from the manufacturer, they hope to have it running by the end of April. They've already had the dredge containment pond already built down there, and they're just ready to go. So it's going to be a pretty nice piece of equipment that they're getting in. It's going to be a lot more efficient than the old one they used to have. And so they will start at Gremlin immediately and start working on that dredge channel coming out. So aquatic invasive species, we touch on this every year, and I'll make it quick because I'm kind of getting short on time, but we have 2 full-time staff doing this, Chris and Jenna, and they do an amazing job. And for only 2 people, they have a lot of stuff to handle in this state. But we have AIS technicians that work at all of our major boat ramps, and I talked to over 1,600 boaters last year and educated and inspected their boats at Harlan, Sherman, Davis, Elm, Johnson, and Elwood, and expect to see them on the water again this year. You know, we've been fortunate. We don't have zebra mussels out in our part of the state yet, and we want to keep it that way. So, you know, as boaters, do your part. Make sure you clean, drain, and dry your stuff, especially if you visit waters that are known to be infected in Kansas or South Dakota. Big-headed carp continue to be a problem. We see them all the way up to North Platte now in the Platte River, and so we're keeping an eye on them. If you have any encounters with them, please let us know. Vegetation is also a major problem, and we've been doing a lot of work on that, trying to control it now. Curly-leaf pondweed, which is that plant you see on the bottom, can be really invasive and take over an entire lake. And so Chris Starr's been treating lakes with some sonar chemical this past couple of years. And we treated Ravenna last year with really good success. And this year we added Liberty Cove to that mix. And so we're treating both of those with sonar to help control the curly-leaf pondweed. And we're going to do the same with water milfoil. We have several lakes around Kearney. We're going to treat that in also. And then finally, closing out here, we have a new Larry Pape does an amazing job with his group of fishing volunteers, and they have a great youth fishing program. And so we're going to have some of our biologist staff show up at these events throughout the summer to talk to anglers, and you know, they can ask us questions and that type of thing. And the first one we're going to do is going to be at Fort Kearney on May 16th, which also happens to be Free Fishing Day. And this is a kind of a cool event. It's a discover fishing event, and you can come out and learn about rod and reel fishing, bow fishing, kayak fishing, fly fishing, all kinds of things. There'll be a bunch of volunteers out there. We were very fortunate a couple years ago to get a nice donation from the Steve Heil family. Steve was a former volunteer fishing instructor. And we used that money to purchase, or Larry used that money to purchase a fleet of fishing kayaks. And so now we're going to have some curriculum on teaching people how to use fishing kayaks and that type of thing. So look for that in the future. And we'll have them at Fort Kearney on May 16th. And then also we're going to do a Ask a Biologist event at the Mormon Island State Recreation Area on June 4th. That's for one of the family fishing nights. And most of those family fishing nights are run by fishing volunteer Harold Fankhauser, which I saw his name on here tonight. So I'd like to give a big shout out to Harold. He's been really instrumental in promoting and doing these workshops all over the central district. You'll see him in Gibbon, Grand Island, Holdridge, Lexington, Loop City. He's all over the place, and he's got a big crew of guys and gals that help him out. And so, thanks, Harold, for all your efforts on that. And with that, that's all I have. Sorry, I'm a little bit over on time. We got off to kind of a rough start, but here's the crew, the management crew, and like I say, feel free to reach out to us anytime you have questions, comments, complaints, whatever. We're here to take it. And here's our contact information. And with that, I'd love to answer any questions you might have on things in here in the district.
Nice job, Brad. Just as a reminder, any questions you have, click on that chat box at the bottom of your screen and type them in there, and we'll get to them and let Brad and his crew address any questions that any of you might have. Towards the end there, you were talking about kind of water levels and whatnot, and how low water, that sort of thing. Um, Drought, low water, does that affect your stocking regime or strategies at all?
Yeah, it does. We typically stock fish by the acre of available habitat or available water. And so, I'll just use Harlan for an example. When it's full, we're stocking more walleye in there than we do when it's down. We stock fry at 1,000 fish per acre. And so when it's full, we're stocking 13.5 million fish. And this year we've knocked that down to about 11 million fry. So yeah, we adjust with water levels on most of our irrigation districts. We adjust our stocking rates.
I'll add a follow-up to that, Brad. Do you ever change species in addition to stocking rates based on water levels?
Do we change species? Is that what you ask?
Yeah, do you ever stock different species just based on water levels like at Harlan?
Typically not. I mean, typically we have a pretty set, what we're going after. I mean, we don't really change species just because the reservoir is going to be low. In reverse, in the past, when the reservoir fills up, we'll stock some of the species that prefer flooded shoreline habitat, like largemouth bass and black crappie. We've added those to Harlan when it fills to take advantage of the flooded vegetation that the reservoir inundates, when it comes back up.
Sure. I know you've done a lot of work recently on the I-80 lakes doing some renovations. May have also had some fish kills out there. Maybe just talk about the status of those and updates on post renovations and any fish kills that may have happened on the I-80 lakes. A couple that have been mentioned were Bass Way and Bufflehead.
Yeah, we did. I'll start with Bassway. We had a natural fish kill there last October. It happened when the stratification broke up in October, and the anoxic water on the bottom of the lake mixed with the top water, and it was a pretty significant kill. We saw a lot of carp even dead in that one. So I would guess we probably lost a good percentage of our bigger sport fish. We didn't have time or to go in and sample it last fall. We're going to probably do that here in the next couple weeks, but we'll be probably restocking that with largemouth bass for sure, and we'll see what we have left for crappie and bluegill in there. But yeah, it was a pretty significant one. So and it was all natural. We see that occasionally in sand pits because they have a lot of deep water, and sometimes when they stratify real hard in the summer months, there's a lot of water down there that doesn't have oxygen in it. Bufflehead was one we renovated in October of 2024, and it didn't get stocked back with fish until last spring, early summer. So we've put perch, smallmouth bass, and black crappie back in it. And we sampled it last fall, and they're still pretty small yet. You could catch them, but there's not going to be much over 6, 8 inches, probably 6-inch bass in there right now. So it's going to be about another year for that one.
Sure.
And
Speaking of smallmouth bass, what are some of the better smallmouth bass areas with boat access and just in general out in your area?
yeah, for big waters, Johnson's probably our best big reservoir smallmouth bass fishery. Elwood's kind of come on the last couple of years. We're seeing more smallmouth bass in Elwood, so that's just kind of a sleeper for a big water body, but it's pretty good. And then War Axe would be our best interstate lake. It's had a pretty established smallmouth fishery in it now for about 15, 16 years. And then we've introduced them into Key West, and we renovated that in 2020. So that one's coming on, and it's been pretty good. And then they're also at Archway number 2, 3, and 4, and then at Sandy Channel number 2. So we got kind of a variety. I mean, we've over the years we've about every one of these lakes have largemouth in them, and we've been asked for some different species, and so smallmouth have shown to be pretty good. So we'll go with them. Unfortunately, we've seen anglers move a lot of largemouth bass back into these water bodies, and over time the largemouth tend to take back over. So sometimes the smallmouth fishery in those small interstate lakes is going to be pretty short lived.
Yeah, kind of on that uh same topic of unique fisheries. What about yellow perch options out there?
Yeah, we a lot of those are going to be the same lakes as that we put the smallmouth bass in. We've kind of seen that smallmouth and perch get along pretty well. So, Key West, or Archway number 2, Sandy Channel number 2, those were all ones we stocked back with yellow perch. We also have them at Bufflehead, but they're not going to be probably big enough to harvest there yet. And then there's a few of them in a lot of different interstate lakes. Key Lake, by the hockey rink, also has yellow perch in it. So we try to introduce those in quite a few places, and they do really well right after the renovation. We'll get some couple really good years of growth, and then they seem to slow down, and we can't replace those big 11 and 12-inch fish as quick as we can originally. So
Sure. A couple questions about Harlan. Will Gremlin Cove be closed when the dredging is happening? Do you know anything about that?
yeah, we met with the Corps last week. We had a stakeholder meeting with them, and that question was brought up at that point in time. And it didn't sound like they were going to have to close it. I mean, there might be some inconvenience for boaters at times, but I think they're going to try to do their best to keep that ramp and that whole area open while they're dredging. So, I mean, I can't say enough good things about the Corps guys down there. They've gone out of their way to make access as good as they can down there with the situation they're dealing with. And I mean, I think they'll bend over backwards to keep it open as much as they can. So, and with this new dredge, I don't think it's going to take them long to get it cleaned out. It's several times more efficient than that great big old dredge they had down there. So I think once they figure out how to run it, it's going to happen pretty quick.
And then sticking with Harlan and the low water, does that affect the shad population at all?
Yeah, we probably, it could. We could see some. We, I don't know what we had for winter kill down there this year. We had some pretty severe cold weather when the reservoir was still ice free that can cause some pretty super cooled water, which that's typically when you see the shad start to die off. But I haven't heard a lot of reports about dead shad down there this year. But so hopefully we didn't lose too many of them over the winter. Hopefully we lost just the right amount to get rid of some of the big adults, and so we can have a good year class of little ones this year.
Sure. What about rock bass out in your area? Any fisheries or planned stockings or future fisheries?
Yeah, we do have rock bass in a few of our interstate lakes. We put them in one of the Archway 4 when we renovated it. So there's a pretty high density of them in there, but they're not real big. The North Kearney Rest Stop Lake. We've stocked it with rock bass several times in the past, and it has some 10 to occasionally 11-inch fish get caught out of there. Sandy Channel number eight's also a really good rock bass lake. It's been historically really good. So those are probably three of our top ones.
Sure. And something we've had kind of it's a few lakes across the whole state, but specifically in Key West are the triploid crappies. Um, Future of those in Key West.
Yeah, I don't know. We requested some of those. At least the North Platte guys requested some of those this year, and like I mentioned, our hatchery guys they'll do about anything we want them to do, but they kind of drew the line and said they didn't want to raise triploid crappie anymore. It's just kind of a tough. They're kind of a tough thing to culture. They have to do it all in the lab, and they got a lot of other things going on that time of year, and so they didn't really want to do it. So at this point in time, I don't think we're going to stock triploid crappie in the future, but that could change. We could talk them into it, but we haven't seen great results with them at Key West yet. When we've had some, they're up to about 14, 15 inches, but we haven't we haven't got them up to that 17, 18-inch range yet, like we did at Key Lake when they were in there.
Sure. Um, all the way back to the beginning of the presentation when we got going on the agenda screen, what lake was that?
Oh yeah, that was Sherman Reservoir when it was full.
Very good.
Mm-hmm.
And just another reminder that the South West meeting is following ours at this meeting at 7:30 tonight for anybody that wants to chime into that. I don't have any other questions, but nice job, Brad, and let you sign off.
Yeah, thanks. And my apologies for the technical difficulties at the start of it. I computers aren't always my strong suit, but that's why I hire these young kids. They can figure that out. But no, I thank you all for joining in tonight. And like I say, we're always here for whatever you want, and feel free to get a hold of us. And hope you all have a good year on the water this year. We expect some pretty good fishing opportunities, and it's been a nice spring. There's a lot of people chomping at the bit right now to get out, and a lot of people are already out there. So, I wish you all the best, and thanks for everything you guys do and for buying the permits. And let us know if you need anything. With that, I'll sign off unless Aaron or anybody wants to say anything. Lincoln, I would encourage you to join the Southwest meeting tonight. It starts at 7:30. So if you're not registered for that yet, get registered, and you can learn about what's happening out west at Southwest Reservoirs and McConaughey. So tomorrow
Yep,
night we
Brad.
have the Northeast and the Northwest talks. So
Yep, Brad. The only thing I was going to add is just what you said there of tuning in tomorrow, and then I know it's been a question here that popped up last night because as an attendee you can't see it as well, but at the peak here we had about 70 people tuning in, and so just wanted to let everybody know, and again, yeah, echo Brad's sentiment. We appreciate you tuning in, taking time out of your night, and feel free to give Brad or Tyler or Thomas a call anytime you got questions.